Welcome to the Emblazers, the show for B2B Leaders Igniting Revenue. I'm your host, Amanda, and I am joined by my colleague, some might call him the Stradivarius of sales precision, Tim Reister. Tim, it's always good to see you.
Does that mean I'm high strung?
Oh, you know what? Well, no comment because this is being recorded.
my
I'm
or
just
my wires are a little loose.
Of
Either.
course, you know what that word means. I, in full transparency, had to Google it and I went down this rabbit hole on what this was. And now I know more about the violin than I care to, but it super aligns to how precise you are when it comes to sales and sales strategy. So it's good to see you, my friend.
Good to be here. We had a good time with Rohail, and everybody's gonna find out why in a
Oh
couple
my
minutes.
gosh, it was so insightful. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit nervous now to talk to him, but much in part because the how he shares with us and you two listeners soon as you dive into this podcast episode, how to get access to that C-suite, which is so critical these days in the decision making process, you're in for a real treat. So I hope that you enjoy it because I have a lot of homework to do after listening to him chat.
Well, everybody out there who listens to this, you probably know it, and he told us this. Purchasing levels and authorities have gotten lower for most of your traditional buyers, and more often than not, you're going to end up in the suite, whether you wanted to or not. So today's episode is going to give you some insights on how to be more effective and to reduce your fear of heights. Get it? Heights. Go up to the C-suite. Watch
Take
the
a
show.
listen. Our guest today, Rohail Khan. He's the president of Digital Services and Solutions at the Institute of Robotic Process and Automation and Artificial Intelligence. Say that 10 times fast, where he leads a global team revolutionizing business through automation and AI. He's been a visionary with over 25 years in executive leadership. Rohail has generated over $500 million in revenue through his innovative Gen I solutions in both banking and in healthcare. Not only that, he also holds a patent for the Healthcare FICO score, and he's really known for transforming organizations through digital innovation. He's also currently serving as a facilitating consultant at Corporate Visions, and he is super passionate about creating value, empowering teams and leaders, and pushing boundaries of what's possible with AI. So excited to have Rohail with us. It's really good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Amanda. Great to be here as always.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Rohail. With an introduction like that, there's some big expectations today for this podcast. I'm just going to tell you.
No pressure, Rohail.
Yeah, so there's so many ways to look at your background and experiences, but the one I'd love to start with is the one that I think our sales leader audience is going to be really curious about. You've been a deciding executive. Oftentimes, as sellers, we want to get access to executives who make big decisions, and you were that executive who made big decisions and bought millions of dollars worth of stuff. And we want to know what was going on inside your mind as a buyer when you faced salespeople and sales leaders like us, because I think that we are slightly afraid of the C-suite. So would love to just start out by saying, what are some of the main things you would first tell a salesperson or a sales leader they need to know in order to be meaningful and relevant to someone in your seat?
Well, so great question there, Tim, and let me try to unpack that a little bit. I think first and foremost, you have to be confident to be in the room. I think that's the most important part initially. And what does that require? It requires preparation. What I would tell you is in my 26 plus years as a C-level exec, the challenge that sales teams have had with me is you can't come at me with the same pitch you've used in kind of a what I would call a rinse and repeat model. It has to be relevant to me. It has to be kind of unique to my situational circumstances, and you have to elevate up the conversation. The challenge is, as C-level executives, I won't know the detail of the product or the feature or the functionality of whatever product and service combinations you're trying to pitch. But what I do care about are three very important things: risk mitigation, impact to my business, and the outcome that you can generate based on the set of solutions that you're bringing to the conversation. The world we live in today is more complex than it's ever been, and I don't ever see it getting easier. So the challenge for the sales leaders is to be more relevant, but be prepared for the conversation. And don't ask the simple questions that you should, with 5 minutes of preparation, you should already know the answers to. Things like, hey, Rohail, what are your strategies? Hey, Rohail, what organizationally, what are you guys focused on? You should know that coming in. Because when I interact with a salesperson who has that kind of an approach, it tells me it's going to be 15 or 20 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back with no value. And that's an unfortunate situation for the salesperson because it doesn't take much to be focused and ready to have the conversation with an executive.
Yeah, great. Two great points I want to see if you could expand on for our audience. One, what were those three again? You said risk mitigation, impact, outcomes. Just repeat that for our audience. And then I want to peel each one back a little bit.
Sure. First of all, risk is the one thing that executives will never delegate down because it relates to their career progression, it relates to their compensation, it relates to the role that they have in the organization. So risk is always first. How are you going to mitigate the risk that I may understand or may not even be visualizing or understanding that you can affect positively? Number two is the impact. I'm looking for capabilities that can either further accelerate revenue growth, revenue acquisition, retention of clients, or cost takeout or efficiency or scalability. So there has to be some meaningful impact that is at the scale that's relevant to what I care about. If you show up and at Xerox, I ran a $11.5 billion segment of the services portfolio. If a salesperson came to me and talked to me about saving me $5 million, that's not even a rounding error on the rounding error. So it has to be impactful and relevant in terms of scale and size. And then the last one is outcome. What are the set of outcomes that you can either accelerate if they're positive outcomes or mitigate if they're negative outcomes? And that's things like revenue growth, cost takeout, retention, customer churn, things of that nature that are going to be measured at the top of the house.
Yeah, and to me, you said something there where they have to come to the table, kind of knowing what your strategies already are, and be able to tell you something that maybe even on the risk side or elsewhere where you said, you might not even know it. Like you know what some things are, but you don't know what everything is. A salesperson, do they feel comfortable, and how can they get comfortable telling a C-suite executive something they think you don't know?
Well, there are multiple ways to do that, Tim. And I think one of the best ways is always go. In fact, all of them are always anchored in taking the time to do research, taking the time to get familiar with the organization, with their market, with their set of competitors. And I'm not saying do a 5 minute, chat GPT search and try to, rinse and repeat that. What I'm talking about is AI is a very powerful tool and can help you with preparation and synthesizing information. But if I'm facing off to an executive in a public organization, pull up their earnings call, look at their last transcript, look at what their data is on their investor relations site. Get to know what they're thinking about. Organizations, especially those that are public, will tell you very clearly on an earnings call, here are my problems, here are my risks, here are my challenges, and here's what we're doing to address them. So there are good sources of information, both through analysts, SEC filings, competitive information that allow the individual to be more prepared versus trying to come at me with a script that you hope I'm going to follow. Because the reality is, I don't know what your script is. So I'm never going to follow your script. And the first time I go off the reservation, you're kind of stuck with a humana kind of situation and you're going to struggle. So the more prepared you are, the easier it is for you to kind of pivot when I throw you that curveball response, and you can re-engage me and start to kind of lead me down the path you want me to engage with you on.
As a salesperson trying to get access to you, be honest about this one. What percentage of the time can a salesperson get access to you at an executive C suite level, kind of on their own, just some sort of outbound tactic, versus the percentage of time you're gonna require that this thing be championed or sponsored up in a way? What does that look like to get on your calendar?
So that's a really good question, Tim. It kind of depends on the nature of the inquiry or the nature of the situation. And what I mean by that is, if there's a major initiative that we've just launched as part of a disclosure we've just done, or let's say it's an M&A we've just executed, and now I'm the head of operations and I've got a synergy goal to achieve for the organization. Those situational contexts create the opportunity for a well-informed and thoughtful sales executive to lean in and get my attention. Now, your second part of your question is how frequently have they been successful? I would tell you the modalities can shift, but COVID did a lot of bad things. One of them is it threw us back into the 90s. So the major modality now seems to be email or maybe voicemail, but it's really email. And so I would tell you I would say less than 1% of the emails that I get, it's probably a fraction of 1%, are interesting enough for me to actually engage via email because they're not provocative, they're not relevant, they're not unique, they're not concise. It's kind of the generic, Martech kind of approach that you get, which isn't personalized at all. So that barely gets past my EA, let alone the spam filter. What I will tell you though is if somebody is provocative and insightful, I, as an executive, I've never been level conscious. So I would look at an email outreach, and if that subject line is provocative and intriguing, I'll actually look at it. I'll click on that email to see, well, that was kind of odd. Well, let me see that's kind of unique. Let me see what they have to say. That's the way that they can get my attention. But that subject line and that first line of the email, it's the most precious real estate any sales executive has because you've got 5 to 7 seconds max to get me to hook in. And if you don't, it's swipe left and it's gone.
Okay, so
Swipe
that's
left,
juicy.
it's
Yes,
gone.
I know. I don't know where I go with that one. Sounds a little risque. Speaking of risque and provocative, that was a juicy answer that is begging, just begging for a example.
Rohail, that was super, super insightful. I'm not going to lie. I am totally nervous now to talk to anyone in your position, but now I hear it. Research, research, research. But I want to go back to what you were just talking about and how do we get Rohail to swipe right and not left? So you mentioned, if we're not capturing a salesperson, not capturing your attention within the first 5 to 7 seconds, you're swiping left. You've moved on. I'm curious, any good example of how to get your attention?
Sure. Well, I'll actually give you an example. It's a very recent one. In my organization, we do a lot of work in AI-based healthcare models and using agentic AI now in healthcare, specifically in areas like radiology, in patient diagnosis, et cetera. And my sales team shared with me an outreach campaign that they had pushed to the top 200 hospitals in the US. And it was very generic. It was generic and it talked about our product capability. And as you would imagine, we had zero pull through. We were targeting the CFO. Now, CFOs don't know about technology. In fact, they don't care about technology. They care about impact. And so when I looked at what the team had done, what I actually did is recraft that outbound message. And the subject line focused on de-risking litigation exposure based on misdiagnosis. I got a lot of pull through and I've set up many conversations with CFOs. Why? Because the CFOs own risk for those hospitals, number one. Number two, they sit on risk and audit committee and report to the board. And number three, they're focused on litigation risk because when they have to make a payout, aside from the limited insurance coverages, it comes right off their bottom line. So it's an example of how to focus in on what the CFOs care about, which is revenue, which is profitability, and ultimately risk. And so my coaching to our team was you have to make the outreach relevant to that specific C-level executive based on their role and their area of responsibility. And it has to be a hook that elevates urgency. And risk is the most urgent focus point for a CFO.
I think that's fascinating that on one hand, you're a buyer decision maker and you expect certain things to come to you in your C-level chair a certain way. Now you have your own company where you have to say, hey, we need to talk to the C-suite like the C-suite. So for those who are listening out there, maybe there's C-level executives in your company who could help you with your messaging and approaches because they sit in those chairs themselves and they see things every day, and could give you some pointers on what they might respond to. I think that's one takeaway I got from that.
I think it's a perfect kind of insight, Tim, and I've done that for 26 years as an executive. I've always had for my most senior clients where I'm the executive sponsor, I've always told my teams, pitch me before you pitch the client. Because if you pitch me and you're successful, that means you're ready, you're prepared, and you're confident in front of the client. Because I know the client, I know the personality, I know our business, and I know what our product and service capabilities are. So, I do that not to make the lives of my salespeople difficult. In fact, quite the opposite. I do that so they're never unprepared or dressed down in front of a client.
Well, you do that as a side gig too. You work with corporate visions to go to their clients and do deal coaching and business and financial coaching to help salespeople get ready to face the C-suite. I always say in a risk-free, quota-free environment where they get to practice on you before they go in front of a their own customers. Any examples of I don't know if it's a before and after example or maybe a thing that you see most often that you must course correct on? Like, what would be the things that you see most often that people think this is the right thing to do, and you have to fix that for them, and then it works?
Yeah, a great question, Tim. I think a lot of the executive sales leaders that we engage with, they're in those roles because they've been very successful over the last, call it 10, 15, 20 plus years of selling. So all of a sudden, they're now pivoting to a very different environment. And think of where the environment has shifted over the last 5 to 7 years, especially after COVID. Post COVID, we've seen a lot more what I would call multi-party decision making, meaning the CFO is much more involved. The CEO is much more involved. Organizations are much more diligent about cash flow and about those decisions. So that what worked historically isn't enough. It's not differentiating. And so the challenges that I hear and see, especially in those sessions with clients, is I'm seeing the same pitch focused on product, function, features, or pricing. All of those marginally work at the doer level. They do not work to get traction at the executive or C-suite level. And that's where it's got to be about risk, impact, and outcome. So the pivot that we engage on with those sessions with clients is you have to take kind of the insights that you have, and I describe it as you've got to pull the thread 3 or 4 levels deeper. You can't just hit me with the same thing you hit me with because my decision criteria is different. I may be new to the room, and I'm definitely new to you because now all of a sudden, where the plant manager could make a decision, that got escalated up to the C-suite. Where the division president could have made the decision, their authority got reduced.
Mm.
They could approve 5 million, now they're down to 250,000. So that multi kind of party decision requirement means you have to cater to a CXO, a CFO, CEO, COO, much more so than maybe historically you've ever had to. And that means that your story has to be much more aligned to those key strategies that organizational executive is accountable to deliver against. That's the connection you have to make. And that's what we talk about is how to drive either insight and research to level up the conversation and not just keep pitching what you were pitching. Because it's not about product, feature, functionality, or pricing. That gets you relegated down into the organization. And once I delegate you down, good luck trying to get back to me.
Yeah, I remember that person. They don't get another chance, right? Who let them in here? So risk, impact, outcome. Risk, impact, outcome. I'm just going to keep saying those 3 words because it's the litmus test. It sounds like for the message, the presentation, and the pitch, the proposal, whatever you want to call it. Is there any other sort of magic winning concept that you really like to share that opens people's eyes and they're like, I never thought of it like that?
Well, I'll give you an example of what I put in place, both at Hewitt and at Xerox. We were a large BPO organization. At Hewitt, it was about $8.5 billion. At Xerox, it was over 9.5. And we had a lot of large contracts. And when we were coming up to renewals, invariably procurement or the client kind of contact would say, "Wow, our teams love your services. They love you guys, but you're really expensive. You got to cut your price." And this is the normal kind of action of procurement team because their goal is to cut you down in price. And I used to make sure that every one of my sales execs or account leaders who were leading renewals had the following talk track, almost verbatim. And it went something like this: we're very competitively priced. The reality, though, is today we cover a lot of risk and insulate your organization from a lot of the risk that you today don't have to manage. If pricing is the only issue, we're happy to bring our executive to talk to your C-level executives and determine how to de-scope some of the services to transition risk back to your organization to accommodate the pricing requirements that are there. We wouldn't recommend it, but it is, if that price is the only issue, we're happy to do that and work with your executive to de-scope that services and have you take on that risk. I can tell you, Tim, in almost 20 years, I've never had a head of procurement or procurement leader convince any one of their C-level executives to take on risk that they didn't have before so procurement could hit a in-year savings number. Because we, as you know, just as well as I, any risk event is going to dwarf any savings number that was there. And there's no smart executive that is willing to take on risk that can derail their career, their trajectory, their business, just so someone can save a couple of hundred, maybe even a couple of million. And my deals were, 300-400 million in ARR. So they were large deals with heavy exposure. One mistake could be a 9-digit number.
I would
I,
swipe right on that,
yeah, right.
straight off. And it also sounds a little similar to conversations that my spouse and I sometimes have when we're trying to get somebody to convince the other person of something. But yeah, that was I, just really insightful.
Yeah, everybody's got to go and replay that. They got to rewind. Do people rewind anymore? I'm not sure what they do.
Oh
They got to
no, Tim.
slide back. They got to slide that little ball back and then listen to it again and listen to it again. De-scoping risk, the risk hot potato, passing it back and forth,
Hmm.
however you want to view it. That idea that the price difference isn't something I now have to point to all my differentiated features. I'm simply saying the price difference is where we take the risk for you. That's gold. That we're going to have to put that in the excerpt that we share with everybody, and everybody who's listening to this right now is going to share that around their company.
We'll be right back.
Join hundreds of B2B revenue leaders at Emblaze Revenue Summit 2025, powered by Corporate Visions in Denver, April 15th through 17th. Connect with top CROs, gain exclusive insights, and get buyer-centric playbooks from experts and peers. Reignite your sales leadership with evidence-based approaches you can start using the next day. Will we see you at the Ultimate Conference for Revenue Leaders? Visit cbi.to/summit to secure your spot at Emblaze Revenue Summit 2025.
Rohail, what would be something surprising we would learn about a C-suite when making a decision?
That was a great question, Amanda. I think one of the things that may surprise a lot of sales leaders, and it's almost the glaring statement of the obvious, but it's not well understood. The simple fact is that executives behave like they're compensated to behave. And that's a pretty telling issue. What that means, though, for the sales executive is you have to understand what drives their behavior, and compensation drives behavior. Now, at the C-suite level, there's a very clear connection between the executive compensation of the individual you're targeting and organizational performance. That's what comp committees do. They make sure that there's 100% alignment with the outcomes of the organization, and if the organization wins, the executive wins, and vice versa. So one of the things I've coached my sales teams to be focused on for the last 20 plus years is understand the metrics of performance, understand the comp structures of the executives that you're targeting and those personas. As an example, a CFO is going to be measured on cash flow. They're going to be measured on DSO, which is days sales outstanding, which is another metric of cash flow. They're going to be measured on EBITDA. They're going to be measured on cost and efficiency and potentially errors and omission payments, which are penalties. So those are all financial metrics that drive the compensation and success of the organization and of the individual CFO. There's 100% alignment there. Now, if I'm selling to a CFO, I've got a capability like our team does around using AI in healthcare to reduce litigation expense of somebody in the radiology department missing a diagnosis, which creates a litigation event, which could be 20, 30 millions of dollars or more. All of a sudden, I talk about how to de-risk that performance based on our ability to increase the diagnosis accuracy. That's a very different conversation than asking a CFO, hey, we've got some cool AI tools that really help radiologists do better diagnosis. or speed up the diagnosis that they have. He says, that's great. Well, talk to the radiologist. What are you talking to me for? The reason I'm talking to you is because when the radiologists make mistakes and you're signing the check for the litigation, that number stays with you. I can help you write fewer checks. That's a compelling interaction.
Yeah, I'm really struck by this idea that, because executives, I think, like to at least put on the air that they are rational, logical decision makers and they're just going to look at the facts. But there's some emotion at play here, like their own comp and their personal reputation. So, talk to me a little bit about maybe not falling for this idea that executives are all just counting numbers, that they're still actually human beings when they make these decisions, and there is some emotional intuition involved as well.
I'll tell you, Tim, there is 100% emotion associated with any executive in a role. It took them a long time to get to that C-suite level role. Their goal is not to get higher; it's to stay where they are. If it took me 25 years to become a CFO, I may not aspire to be part of the board, but I definitely want to stay as CFO, or I want to grow to a CFO of another company, which means my career has to stay on track. And one of the things that most executives do a good job of hiding, to your point, is they hide their ego. Every executive has an ego. Now, some people carry it on their sleeve like Elon Musk, but most don't. But it is something that drives their motivation. Compensation is a key driver of motivation, as it should be. And the more you understand that as a sales executive, the more you can understand how to engage with that C-level executive, because you're focused on the things that align their behavior to the behavior of the organization and the outcomes of the organization.
Tim, if there was only somewhere where sales leaders could go and really have a toe to toe with a CXO to dive deeper into everything Rohail has just shared.
That would be amazing, wouldn't it, if there was such a thing? This is about as cheesy a segue as you can get, but
I'm sorry I had to do it, but I know you were still going to talk. So,
oh yeah, I love it. Well, for those listening, we have a conference, the Emblaze Revenue Summit, coming up April 15th to the 17th. Rohail and others like him are going to be all over that content agenda. In fact, this event has lots of content, but there's a whole path throughout the 2.5 days to get engaged with the CXO decision maker and understand how to be more effective and better at gaining access and winning the heart and the mind. We just found out both of the executive decision maker. There's going to be workshops, there's going to be panels, there's going to be research, there's all kinds of insights to help you and your team become better at this. And Rohail being one of those experts who's going to be joining us. So you've been getting a taste of it today. And you can see it's good stuff. I love this part, Rohail. Like, we got to demystify the C-level executive, because at some point, I think they take on this mythological sort of idea in everybody's minds, and their knees start to shake. And we all, I like to say, become afraid of heights, trying to reach them. But at the end of the day, they're still human. They've got specific things they care about, and they will respond if you can align yourself to those things. That's what I'm hearing.
100%, Tim. They're accessible, but are you prepared to lean in and engage them in a way that is provocative and insightful?
Rohail, thank you so much for joining us. This was such incredible insights on how to get access to the C-suite. Hey, listeners, if you want to learn more, come check us out at the Revenue Summit in Denver, April 15th through the 17th. Holy moly, Tim. Risk, impact, outcome, compensation. Did I hit those four? Oh, do your research. Swipe left, swipe right. So much to unpack.
Yeah, who knew the C-suite was so complex and yet so human and emotional at the same time? So I think Rohail really gave us a great summary of how to think about engaging with the C-suite. But of course, there's more work for all of us to be done.
For sure. For sure. I keep going back to this conversation we had about emotional intelligence and this active listening. And this could be just like the theme as we're hearing from these leaders, these practitioners. Like, yes, Rohail shared such a prescription to how to get access to the C-suite, right? But the same token, it's in those actual conversations that the seller has to be actively listening, because he's going to pivot. There's going to be a point in that Oregon Trail that your ox is going to go to the right, and you've got to just understand where they're going with that conversation. That was an old person reference in case
Yeah, I mean, I know it, but I just never expected it to be said on a modern podcast like this with sales and executives and Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. So maybe that's
curveball.
maybe that's good. We are like Renaissance podcasters. We've made it all the way back to the pioneer days. Yeah, I think that what people heard here was sort of inside the mind and the heart of a C-suite executive, and really some instantly helpful things that you can do differently tomorrow than you were doing today. So we trust that you will take this and you will succeed, and the Emblazers will have done its job.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us this time. We'll see you next week on another episode of the Emblazers. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this podcast.